I know marketers in comics don't basically. I don't believe any marketer in comics doesn't want people to write about them for free as a volunteer basis. I don't think they want to do that, but I think it's just trying to find a way to reach readers in a way. I feel like I'm getting vastly off topic here, but just to I would say just to understand what your book is and what your book isn't, finding the places that cover those things or places that have ways to figure that out, and go towards that. Like I would read a monthly interview with my favorite artist, who I'm not going to say. I would love doing that, but after about 3 or 4 months, if no one's reading it, and I don't think I would talk to this artist and be like, hey, we need to find maybe either some other way to do it. Maybe we tinker with it, or maybe we discontinue it, or maybe we do it in another format.
This week's episode is brought to you by our friends at Manage Comics. Are you tired of outdated, clunky software running your shop? Manage Comics is the modern solution for comic store owners who want a smarter, easier way to manage their shop. It's built on Shopify, the world's #1 e-commerce platform. With an integrated POS system, Manage Comics saves you time and makes more money by giving customers the power to manage their own subscriptions. Upgrade to a simpler system that works for you, not against you. And I'm going to go off script in here and say, I love Manage Comics. There are other solutions out there that are also really good, but there's a reason that we're so close to Brian Garside and work with him and his team. Manage Comics is a really wonderful tool for any comic shop owner. You should join their next webinar and see the difference for yourself. Visit managecomics.com/webinar today. And make sure you told them that we sent you. Hi, it's Adam Freeman. This is Comic Industry Insiders, a weekly podcast where I get to talk to the people behind the scenes of the comic book industry, the people who make the comic industry work. And this week is no different than past. Chris Arrant is the editor-in-chief of the pop culture news site Popverse and has written about comics for Newsarama, Publishers Weekly, Life Magazine, Entertainment Weekly, Marvel Comics, CBR, and many others. He is the author-interviewer of the Tomorrow's book, Modern Masters, Cliff Chiang, and has written fiction comics works for Image Comics, Ad House Books, and I swear to God, Blue Water Publishing. Chris has done just about everything there is to do in comics journalism, and in our continuing series of Who Killed Comics Journalism, he is just the crime reporter we're looking for. Friends and neighbors, it's our good buddy, Chris Arrant. How you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me, Adam. I really appreciate doing this. Lots to talk about. I feel like we've done test runs of this interview in the back rooms and halls of comic conventions for years.
We have. And I'll tell you, Chris, you among others, as I started talking about this question of who killed comics journalism, you have been wonderful in that you are always, kind of poking me with little data, and want to make sure that we're, wanted to give you an opportunity to actually get a lot of that on the record, because you have spent a lot of time looking at this. In fact, I was just preparing for this. I was looking at meeting notes of stuff that we talked about. And I have a meeting that I think you and I talked to in 2021, maybe.
Yeah. Panama City, Florida, born and raised, little small town here called Millville. My dad worked at a paper mill. I learned later, paper mills sold paper to comics publishers, among other people, International Paper Company. He was a union foreman, which was great. We're fortunate to have several comic stores over the years, and as I got older, I revealed some comics creators lived here from time to time, Dave Dorman, who did a lot of Star Wars paintings, lived here for a time. Terry Moore from Strangers in Paradise would vacation here, and he would visit comic stores and just sign random comics and put them on the shelves. I never talked to him about that, but I've talked to 2 comics retailers who'll tell me about that. One of the old 1940s timely creators didn't create Namor, but was involved later on. They lived here in his later years. Fascinating story. Never got to meet him. before my time. But yeah, Panama City, Florida. If you think of Florida as a upside down L, like we're in like the top left of it. Some people would call it South Alabama, and they would not be wrong.
So my ex-wife went to high school there, so I spent a couple. We went there for a few trips to like see old friends, and she had a friend who owned, or maybe he didn't own the comic shop when I finally went, but he had. I want to say he had a comic shop in a double wide trailer at some point, which
Yes,
sounds like South Alabama. Huh?
Yeah, there was a book bin too of the famous used bookstores with a used comic shelf where you wouldn't know if it was new or used or not. It was just, that's how I first got into comics. Yeah, there was more than one comic book store in a double wide trailer.
South Alabama. Yeah,
South Alabama.
Are you there now? Is that where you live?
Yes, I live here for family reasons and also because the cost of living is really, really nice. I live 3 blocks from the beach, and my house is my mortgage payment is probably a fifth of your rent. Like, and I say this to Adam, but probably a lot of other people in the United States too, unfortunately. But this is how, I don't know. If I had to live somewhere more expensive, I may not be working in pop culture journalism. But yeah, fortunate.
I believe that. Wow. Well, that I had no idea. I'm so glad we were able to do this research because I don't think I would have ever put that together. So was that kind of, I mean, where is it? So looking at all of your early jobs, they're all kind of inside of publishing, publishing and events, right? That seems to be the intersection of your interests. But like, graphic designer, thrifty nickel want ads, Panama City News. Like this is kind of, you have this in your blood, it sounds like.
Yeah. I graduated in 95. I worked for several fly-by-night newspapers, like weekly newspapers, and daily newspapers, and those want-ads papers doing graphic design work and journalism on the side. And then over the course of my career, it's been less and less graphic design and more journalism towards that. But yeah, I know about cutting color for one-color newspapers, editing, in the old sense, and just at the same time, I was fascinated by Image Comics. I was pitching to write comics because I think every comics fan wants to or thinks they can do comics at one point or another. I wanted to draw it. I went to school for art to draw comics. Travis Charest and his work just gave me like this Icarus complex, trying to be a Travis Charest and failing. And I realize now, years later, maybe I didn't need to be Travis Charest. Maybe I could have been like a Jeff Smith. Like, not say I'm good as Jeff Smith, but if super detailed work is not my thing. But yeah, comics has been the through line to that, and I wanted to be involved with that in some way, shape, or form. And what I figured out years later is I like the people of comics and the people of that. So a lot of my stories will be about either how this news or this thing happening affects the fans as people, or about the people that make the comics that we love. Like, everything else is transient. Like, to me, like, as much as I love Pike from the Wildcats or Deadpool's shirt I'm wearing or Jeff Smith's bone, like, I love more the if this was a sports thing, but like, I love the players on the field more than the Oakland Athletics or the Raiders or
I can see that.
Whatever.
Yeah, I mean, and the fans in the stands, right? More than whoever the owner of the Oakland A's is, right? But
yeah,
I definitely vibe with that. I can say that for me, I mean, I love comics. I've read comics my whole life, but I don't read them nearly as much as I used to unless I'm getting paid, like, to read something for notes or whatever. But I am still a daily, it is my hourly obsession to know about the people in comics and what's happening there, and hopefully, making a positive impact there. And I think that that's partially how we vibed, right? It is really about the people that show up, right? It's almost an indicator of who it is you want to be around.
Yeah, just and and that's come back to bite me in some respects. Like some stuff that I'm a fan of, once I learned who the person was and where it's become hard for me to read those comics. I can still say I like those comics, but hard for me to read it. And that's not just the troublesome figures that are accused or arraigned and put in prison for bad stuff, but even just, I don't know, like this person is horrible to people on the internet. And like otherwise a okay person that hasn't broken any laws, but still it just taints personally my reading of the work. I can still write about them. I write about them frequently. I will not say who it is, but it just colors my reading stuff.
Are you sure? You
like
can say one.
Yeah, no, I could not. But it also changes. Like I've learned that I read comics on several different levels. Kind of going to what you said. Like for a while, it was hard to me read it as a fan when I really wanted to write comics journalism full time. But I realized for me, there's kind of 4 ways I read comics. 1 is a fan. 2 is a comics journalist. 3 is a adjacent to the industry. Maybe I'm in the industry, maybe not. And then 4th is the reading it for a pure critical basis, which can be journalism, but more so when I was a judge on the Eisners, like reading it at that level, looking for that sort of things, like not determining between what's bad and good, but determining between what's good and great. Like it reads it on a different level to me, and it's, I don't know, it helps me understand it better. But I also find myself liking some stuff in one reading, but not liking it in other readings, and it's fascinating just to see that rub against each other. Like it's like 2 gears that don't quite fit, and they just kind of grind against each other.
Do you think that does it go the other direction? I'm thinking about that in my own life. I mean, I was an Eisner judge 1 year, and what an experience that is. It's a I don't know. It is a big job. Let's put it that way, right? It is trying to process all of the comics that we want to be submitted for in a year. It's a lot for anybody, and needing to have an opinion on most anything.
Yeah,
you know,
4,000. I think my wife counted like 4,000 comics I had to read over a 2-month span. I remember they would send you just those big boxes, and then like when I was there, we went to San Diego for the final judging, and it was just a room the size of a double wide trailer, but it wasn't a double wide trailer. It was in the middle of San Diego high rise, that just tons of comics. And it was fascinating reading with 6 other experts for a week in a row, like slowly whittling it down from between good to great and from great to magnificent, and being able to have arguments at that level with people. It was eye-opening to me.
I can say that, it was the same for me. And I think we were in a hotel, and so we were in like a conference room that we kind of took over for like 4 days or something. And it's legitimately just stacks everywhere of comics. And it is a lot. There's a lot of arguing because there's a limited amount of space, and there should be, right? You should be conflict. But man, it's a process. It is a process. Yeah, I feel you. Do you find yourself in that? How long ago was that for you?
I believe it was 2017, 2018. So a whole nother life.
Yeah. Yeah, I have no doubt. I wonder what that process is like now post COVID. I can't imagine. And it's always, as a marketer, I've always been asked, how do we lobby these people? And the answer is I don't know, man. I don't know. Put it in front of them. And I don't know. Yeah, I don't think anybody's ever been bribed in order to get something on a list. But who knows? Maybe. I'm not saying you shouldn't try.
Like I actually wrote a piece on this, but I couldn't. I was not able to publish it at the time. But it the process is pretty simple. It's kind of so simple. It's people forget it's out there. There is a submission form that they can fill out every year, where you submit copies. Anybody can submit copies of their work. I would not assume your publisher would send that, because publishers are told, at least during my time, you can submit no more than 5 things. However, some publishers do, but don't assume your publisher will. It doesn't hurt if you wrote an amazing issue of, I'll say, Exquisite Corpse, and Image told you to submit it, it doesn't hurt for you to submit it as well.
Yeah.
The judges aren't going to be like, oh, well, they violated this rule, so we're doing
You're
it do
out.
either. Yeah. So yeah, they're comics fans. So just submit it so that way, at least for your peace of mind, I was considered for this and
That's
follow
true.
the rules. As for bribing and stuff like that, there doesn't need to be any of that. But just
No.
the key thing is just submit your work. Don't rely on other people to say they did, because they have a lot of other jobs too. When DC's former like offices, I visited there when they were prepping there. And an amazing person who would get mad if I said who it was spent a lot of time basically putting all these massive packages together to mail to San Diego. And they do a lot of work. I'm sure Marvel does the same, and other publishers do as well. But it doesn't hurt just to submit your stuff yourself. That goes for comics creators, publishers, comics journalists when there's a journalism category, and even when there's not, for instance, and like other people that are have categories in there as well, like designers. It's incumbent for designers to send the physical, awesome design work that you did, so it stands out for judges instead of sending a PDF. So,
It's interesting is that you said, you're talking about when there is a journalism category, you really, now that I think about it, you really shouldn't even hold back if there isn't a category, right? Because the judges can change the categories each year. So I just realized I should be submitting for comics-based podcast. I don't know why I haven't done that. That's
yeah. If they haven't put out the submissions yet, well, they probably have at this point. But yeah, you should submit every year. Just make it part of your routine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you at some point you start writing as kind of a freelance writer for Tokyo Pop. Is that really your first kind of
my first thing
comics
is
gig?
doing actually no, my first besides in letters columns for Image Comics, my first thing was doing a fill-in weekly in column for Rich Johnson's Lying in the Gutters when it was on CBR. Fucking wild.
Right
Jonah Weiland paid me $80 for that, which I think it's 2003, 2004, which is a pretty good rate for then and pretty good rate for now. After that, I pitched to write for Newsarama. Got a Matt Brady. First piece I did for them was about Stuart Eminem and Kurt Busiek's Superman's Secret Identity. And then after that, I freelanced for multiple places, including Tokyo Pop, but Tokyo Pop came later.
Gotcha. Is it Tokyo Pop your first? Like, where's your first kind of regular gig? Are you just submitting stuff? I mean, you said you had a column for Rich, but is
I
there
wrote one fill-in when Rich took a vacation. Newsarama was my first regular gig, where I wrote 5 stories a month for I think $250 for all 5, so $50 each. That was probably 2004, 2005.
When you look back on that period, we've had a lot of conversation about comics journalism and what it was and what it is now and what it can be. And I say we, I mean you and me, but also I mean like the broader we. There's been a lot of conversation about this right now. One of the critiques that come up are that comics journalists are never entirely what's the word I'm looking for? Unbiased, because you are there to get exposure for some sort of creative job in comics. Like that's the end goal. So therefore, nothing you say inside of comics is, should be taken as unbiased. Is that? Would you say, looking back, I don't want to talk about, I mean, A, let's talk about where you are now and the journalists that you work with now, but B, let's talk about where you were during this period that we're talking about, these, late 90s, early aughts kind of period. Would you say that is fair?
You can see it for some people, but I'd put it as, is it biased for someone to want a job that pays? And I do not think that is the case. I think if that is the case, then a lot of us are biased. Then the guy that thankfully mows my lawn each month so I don't have to, is very biased. because he wants to start a business. And for journalism, everybody is biased. If you watch movies on journalism and that's how your understanding of journalism goes, where journalism shouldn't be biased, then I'm sorry. Everybody is biased. To say to hold them to the standard that they're not human beings that live in a certain town, that live in a capitalist society where money is part of it. Like, there's some level of bias. You want journalists that are biased towards facts. That sounds great. It's okay to be biased. Like, bias isn't a dirty word. Just biased is just you have tendencies towards one thing or another. I will say, to your specific point, there is a undercurrent of some people in journalism, all fields, including comics journalism, want to use that as a doorway to eventually write about comics. To write comics or draw comics.
Sure.
And that is totally okay. Robert Kirkman said he broke in through Image Comics because he pitched an interview with Eric Larson for a newsletter that did not exist. And then when he did the thing, he pitched that. Totally okay. Mark Waid, he started as a journalist for Fantagraphics, other comics publication, not the Comics Journal, but a magazine called Amazing Heroes. Paul Levitz, the publisher of DC Comics for a while, started as a fan journalist. Alex Segura, good friend of mine, he wrote for Newsarama and the Miami Herald, and it goes where there's a way to do it responsibly, but you can see other places that do it irresponsibly, but I don't think that's limited to it's irresponsible because they're wanting to get a paid job in comics somehow. I think it's just irresponsible. Like, things can be fawning, and my shorthand terms is it feels like a press release, or it doesn't ask the critical facts, or it's biased towards one thing or another. Like, if there's a site that gets secret information from a source regularly and an exchange doesn't write critically about that source, that could be biased. It could be okay. I don't know. It's just, there's all sorts of bias. And if we go from being like everything should be unbiased in journalism to understanding that there is bias and just understanding what it is, I think we'd be in a better place.
Yeah. And I like that position that, journalism full stop is biased, right? We're not talking about comics journalism. We're talking about people that are, in a position, right? They are in a job where their job is to interact with others to get information and then to share that information. There are certain biases that are going to come through as a result of that. There's no way around that because we're people. We're not machines, right?
Yep.
I like that. I like that as a position. So, okay. So you're doing these freelance pieces, you're picking up this work here and there. During this period, right around, I think it's 2009. Is this where you get the Blue Water script for Princess Diana? Is that right?
Yeah, I was on and off still wanting to write comics, and I would declare that to my editors. So anybody that I was pitching to, I wouldn't write about actively. So there are certain publishers that I didn't write about for years because of that.
Right.
I actually made a mini comic and took it to San Diego 2006 and handed that out. And mini comic it was an anthology with 4 stories by 4 different people, drawn by 4 different people, written by me. Through that, I got published in Negative Burn when it was at Image. It's a Desperado, I think Joe Pruitt.
Joe Pruitt,
I confused the Pruitts, and I'm sorry, but that I got published in some other places. I was part of a digital comics outfit called Chemistry Set that was associated with Activate. It was after Activate, but basically through those samples, I got other work, including for Blue Water. I didn't know at the time. I wrote a Princess Diana bio comic. It was quite the learning experience. And writing a bio comic is very much like comics journalism, just you're turning it into a comic, which is like another form of comics journalism, like Joe Sacco or something like that. I was in an anthology called 24/7 Volume 2 that Ivan Brandon did for Image. I was part of the Toriyama's comic book tattoo anthology for Image. Did that. Pitched to some other places. Wrote a couple comics that never got published, but I got paid well for. But kind of my ambitions to write comics died when I really wanted, in the early 2010s, when I really wanted to segue to write about comics full time. I realized that basically one had to die for the other to thrive. And so in the early 2010s, I pretty much stopped doing that to really focus towards that. Because I started comics journalism maybe 2005. I got my first full-time job in comics journalism 2015. In that in-between time, I was a graphic designer for local businesses in Panama City, Florida, doing a lot of restaurant menus for tourist places that came and went. I'm really good at installing WordPress if anybody needs it. And
good to know.
I know some stuff like that. I tried to string it together to create a freelance comics journalism career. Like myself, Graham McMillan, Douglas Wolt, and a couple others were trying to freelance and kind of Voltron together a freelance comics journalism job. And so that's what it was like. So,
what was that full-time job?
First full-time job in comics was I was hired as the editor for Newsarama in 2015. Up until that point, they wanted an editor that could live in New York and work off a salary of $40,000 a year. And unfortunately, I was not able to do that. In 2015, previous person left under circumstances, and I was hired then first as a full-time freelancer, permalancer, as we would call it. And then I got a staff job with benefits in, I think, May 2015. That was great.
So you were there really during the period that we're talking about of kind of this shift for Newsarama away from that thing that was built as a comics news site. Like it starts off as kind of this fan site and then becomes comics news, into what it is now, which is, I don't know, something different. I don't even really quite understand how to describe what places like comicbook.com and Newsarama are. You would know this better than I. What is it? How do they kind of categorize now?
In some cases, it's just a department among a larger pop culture website. Like that's what Newsarama is since, I'll say several years ago. But at one point, they were merged with Games Radar, a very, very, very popular games website that is bigger than a lot of other things. They're like second or third to IGN. And so Newsarama became basically their comics section. And in that time, Newsarama stopped covering non-comic stuff, which was great. And myself and the team at the time, which was senior editor Mike Duran, staff writer George Marston, myself, and freelancers, we got to strictly write about comics, and we did some great work. CBR kind of went the other path, where instead of merging with another site, they became a bigger site covering other stuff. But that was even other stuff in addition to being comic book resources. They became movie resources, TV resources. I think at one time, Jonah launched a tattoo blog on CBR, which was great. But that was all even before Valnet. Like it was even comic sites in the early 2000s, even like Wizard covered more than just comics. Like, and I think that's just part of it. It's different varieties of that in terms of trying to find a readership to pay the bills, to pay writers to write about comics. Like, so you sometimes have to write about other things to pay someone what they're worth or close to it to do that. And
where are you at Newsarama? What does this period look like for you?
From probably 2005 to 2015, I was I don't want to say effective a staff writer, but I wrote 20 to 30 pieces a month for about 10 years. Mostly interviews, some like feature articles, stuff like that. 2015, I became the editor, and then around, I believe, 2018, 2019, We segued into Games Radar, and we wrote less about movies and TV, which was great, and more about comics. But then I got to really see what people were actually reading, not what people just like and view on the internet, and learning what the readership actually is helped me make very more informed decisions to understand what people actually want to read about. Different than if, say, Kieran Gillen and Casper Wingard announce a new comic. It becomes the top story on Reddit and LinkedIn, and then it sells 20,000 copies. Like, say you get 1 million likes on Reddit and it sells 20,000 copies. Like, the 1 million likes on Reddit is marketing. The 20,000 copies is what actually pays those people to do that. So it's understanding what the readership says they want or will like versus actually read. And since comics journalism, for the most part, segued away from readers paying for comics journalism in the 2000s, with the, I don't want to say death of magazines, where we would buy our Wizards and Comics Journals and Comic Buyer's Guides, to be an online thing that was ad supported, I think it changed the dynamic and really changed the demands of what people say they want to read and what they actually read. And just, I think it just really changed things. Like, it's like if, I don't know, if your favorite comic book went from charging you to going strictly on ads, the makeup of the comic would change dramatically. And in many ways, like your podcast is listened to by a lot of comics fans. In the same way, the dynamics of creator-owned and work for hire and licensed titles and stuff like that exist within comics publishing. In a weird way, it's the same way for comics journalism. If you think of places like Comics Courier, which is creator-owned, and then people are paid work for hire, like Image does. And then there's truly creator-owned, like Women Write About Comics, stuff like that. But then, like, places like that may not pay enough for people to have a living, and it becomes like a volunteer-led like organization because the readership's not there. Versus big houses like the CBRs and the comic books, and maybe I'll say Popverse, is more like your Marvels and DCs that have to balance other stuff. But at the end of the day, we have to pay the people what they're worth, and we need to write stories that we make sure are being read by people. And that becomes a difficult thing, and some people can get jaded by that. But I think there is a positive to that. If you can see what people actually want to read by their readership habits, it leads to an interesting place.
It's really interesting. It's an interesting concept, and I think that maybe it's something that I feel like I haven't quite connected to in all of this conversation. But perhaps that comics journalism never really went away. It was just, it's now defined by what it is that people are actually interested in, as opposed to that thing that maybe we were aspiring to them be interested in. Like, we want to talk about this, and people say they want to hear about it, but they don't necessarily make the effort, even when it's free, to see it and interact with it. And that's where this conversation of deep thinking, or deep, honest pieces about whatever is happening in our industry or happening creatively, maybe that's where that went, because we just don't really care enough to look at it. We don't care enough to click.
Yeah, and people can find information. Yeah, and people can find information that they want through other means, and they may have this ideal of what they want a comic book website to be, and if somebody created that ideal, they maybe interact with it on a way to help those people make a living. But until they find that, they will not be satisfied with kind of like it's sort of like dating. Like, and your parents might say, like, don't like hold out for like the perfect person and say no to everything else. Go out and date, try their things. Like, there's other things out there, and it's really difficult. And I understand that from a reader perspective, how they want things to be better. But I think it's hard to, I don't know, promote that when things are pretty good right now. And I'd hate for the people that are making the things that are pretty good, but not the ideal for you, like not be able to do it sustainably because you waited because it's not quite good enough. Like, we've seen everybody who's been in comics for any length of time probably has some favorite comics journalism outfit that has come and gone.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, it's because not enough people were, basically, it wasn't bringing in the revenue either through readers coming in with enough volume to pay the advertising, or they weren't buying enough of the magazines, or they weren't contributing to the Patreon enough for people to be able to do that for a living. So they would go do other stuff that does make them a living. And these are really talented people. Like, there's a comics magazine called the Comics Foundry. Amazing work by a guy named Tim Leong and Laura Hudson. They wanted that to work. They had an amazing issue. There's one Matt Fraction cover story that's amazing. Didn't work out. They people didn't support it enough where they could make it a living thing. So they went on and did different stuff. Tim Long became the creative director for Entertainment Weekly. He did pretty good for himself. He's writing some nonfiction books. Did pretty good. Laura went on to be hired by AOL to rebrand a comics website they had called Comics Alliance, who for many people of a certain generation, that became their thing. But even then, Laura wanted to do other stuff, and I believe they're doing like fiction now because they wanted to do other stuff. Like, and there's a lot of stuff that I don't even know about. Like, I miss there's this comics journalist named Tom Spurgeon. Some people may not remember him, but he was huge in my sphere.
Sure.
Never actually wrote for him, but I wrote, I'll say, kind of beside him on the internet. And he launched a Patreon to do a Tom Spurgeon monthly comics journalism magazine. But for all that was said, like, he didn't get enough support to be able to do that for a living. So even in his final years, like, he worked for Comics Crossroads, which is a great convention and organization, because comics journalism just couldn't like pay the bills, which is, I don't want him to go into bankruptcy or have to live in a substandard way to do this thing to give me free comics journalism that I like. But yeah, like, I don't want to get into it like a bummer, but yeah, there's a lot of that.
I think it's a fair note. I mean, if there's no money there, you can't do it for a living, right? You have to. Everybody has to pay rent, right? We're not to a universal basic income where we can just write about, whatever really sub genre you want. Yeah.
I would say in the past 10 years, some of the greatest comics journalism we have seen has been done on a volunteer basis. So, if you look at the Eisner Awards for the past 10 years or so, predominantly volunteer based, or it paid much less than what it was worth. Not because those places didn't want to pay them more, but because the readership wasn't there to do that. But as someone who's volunteered for museums, for galleries, for political campaigns and stuff like that, basically your time to volunteer, like, people can get burnt out on volunteering, and maybe they want to volunteer for something else. Like, volunteering can only go so far, and it's right. I don't think it's right to expect people to basically volunteer like forever to do this thing that they want to do, when there's other places that will allow them to do something close to that and like pay the bills so they can have a life. And with Popverse, we have like an amalgam of that. Like, yes, we don't cover comics full time. We would cover comics more, like, as more people do it. And we have found some key areas over 3 years that people will read about comics, and we definitely do more of that. And we try stuff from time to time. And like, we have there's jokes we have like internally. I was like, only 1,000 people will read this, but I'm one of those 1,000 people. So maybe I'll try it once or twice a month. Or not a lot of people will read this, but it's a story that's worth being told. And then the thing comes, how do we write the story so more people can read it in a way that's not clickbaity, to maybe find some way to do it. And that's about leaning into your bias. Why do I think this is an important story that can't be read? And then that's a problem to be solved. And we don't always solve the problem, but we always publish the story, and we just try to learn how to do that. And it's just about trying things, but just having the support system for that.
Well, so talk about Popverse for a moment. So where does Popverse begin? I think you were there from the beginning, if not, the force behind it. Tell me about the origin story of Popverse, and why bringing a site like this, into the landscape that you're describing. Like, why does that make sense for somebody like ReadPop?
When I was at Newsarama, after about 3-4 years, I could see what I wanted to do for a living, how it's really close to that, but not exactly that. And so I wrote for myself, just like, well, if you had a website, what would it be? And I wrote a pitch, and I took it around to businesses, and I got close a couple times to that. I had a really great pitch meeting at C2B2 2019, and with someone there, got close, made some revisions. 2020, went to C2 2020, and that was the convention where the pandemic was literally happening during the convention.
I remember it very clearly. Yeah. It's a strange convention.
It got put off for what ended up being 2 years. After the pandemic subsided and people started to feel safer. I don't want to say safer. Like everybody at that point had gone into like hunker security mode, just trying to do what they needed to get by. Then the person that I pitched that original idea to came back to me and had another draft of the pitch that fit their business model, that still was a version of what I wanted. And that guy was named Mike Armstrong, was at ReadPop. At one time, he was the event director for New York Comic Con and some other places. He's currently at Fanatics. And this was as ReadPop bought Gamer Network, which is a series of gaming websites, including Eurogamer. And they wanted a comics and pop culture website that could also stream panels, which is what we do. That was around January 22. This was after doing interviews for some other jobs that weren't the right fit at some of the places we've mentioned in the past, that just weren't the right fit. And this became the right fit. So I was hired officially in February 22. Couldn't even say what the name of it was. My wife actually came up with a name for Popverse. And we hired Tiffany Babb. Great hire. She's at Comics Courier now and doing fan files and some other stuff. And then we hired 2 video producers, Veronica Valencia.
I think I've got a copy of Comics Courier right here. Yeah, there we go.
Yes, please buy it. Buy so many that she has to do it for a living. Let's make her do it for a living. Hired Veronica and Ashley the week of Star Wars Celebration, and that was our first convention. We launched on May 18th, 2022. First convention was the tail end of May. We didn't have a staff writer. I had a nice freelance budget, but was finding there was a need for a staff writer. And Graham McMillan was writing freelance for us. And within 3 months of us launching, I was able to convince this big publicly traded company to create a new position for a staff writer. And we interviewed some amazing people, and we hired Graham. And Graham's first week was San Diego 22. And we were off and running. And as my dad would say, that's when the rubber meets the road. There's what I learned about what Newsarama did well and didn't do well, and what other sites do. Learned anecdotally through talking to fans, and also using back-end tools like SEMrush and Parsley and stuff like that, about what the mixture of comics to movies and TV. And then since 22, we've been basically adjusting that mixture to find the right things. One of the things that was in my original pitch pre-pandemic that kind of carried through is this idea of service journalism in comics. What service journalism is you want to know how to do something in comics. Like, we still do flashy features journalism and interviews, but I don't know. How do I read Hellboy in order? What is the release date of Absolute Batman? That may seem very basic and like, oh, you just start at the first issue and you read on. Well, if you've been reading comics, like if you start at Batman #1, Adam and I will say, well, which Batman #1 do you want to start at? And what about Batman Zero? And what about this? So it's service journalism is a key part of this. But in addition to that, just helping explain things in a way that a broader audience can understand. Like there's a lot of us that read comics full time and, for instance, know what the term solicitation is. But if you were to tell someone outside the bubble, hey, solicitations are come up, they might have a different idea for what the term solicit means in a general sense.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Or, the number of times, I think we don't really have this as much anymore, but I remember, especially growing up in Texas, where you use the phrase graphic novel and people are like, graphic? What are they showing? Like, what?
That is a key part of the book banning now, that it is what that argument that you just made is a key part because of the word graphic in there.
Yeah.
The same way the term comic book, everything was funny. And so it's just, I don't know, getting outside of this insider terminology, even though there's a lot of people that are insider to know solicits. Some to say it's just a description of the book, or it's just when they announce their upcoming books, pre-orders, FOCs. We're not wanting to get rid of those terms, but realizing that those are insider terms versus like outsider terms. And if we
What's
want
a pull box, right?
Yeah. It's if we want to engage a larger audience, it's the same type of thing where people say comics should get back on newsstands, comics should do this, and comics should do that. Well, we can't expect get those people to convert to our type of thinking. In some ways, we have to, for comics journalists and pop culture journalists, we have to write in a way that is less discriminate to. You have to have this insider knowledge to understand this story I'm about to read, and so it's just about writing about it in different ways and just being more open to the larger audience that you want. And it's just about understanding the audience. Like the best-selling comic about superheroes for the past 5 years is Dogman. Sorry, Batman. Sorry, like X-Men. And people in your comments or whatever can say, no, well, actually, it's this, but it's Dogman. But I wouldn't say it's a problem, but the issue is the audience reading Dogman isn't on the internet reading a in-depth 2,000-word feature about how Dave Pilkey was inspired by, I don't know, 1980s like X-Men. Yeah. So instead of trying to convert those 5 to 10-year-olds to read my great Gary Groth-esque Dogman think piece, we have to write along those terms. And basically, instead of getting the audience to come to us, it's about going to where the audience is and writing in their terms. And that's a key way. Like, and you can see that through the use of videos, short form videos on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube Shorts to get people to there, even though that's not largely in a way that the industry term is monetizable. The general term is actually make money to pay the people to do it. Like there's things that we're always working on to try to tinker with that formula to find a larger audience that can that want to read comics. And instead of trying to convert them to our way of thinking, I think we need to be open to that broader idea. Like, I want to write a piece on those every time I go on a plane to a convention, which is a lot. There is a comic in the back of each airplane seat that tells you what to do in a case of emergency. That is a comic. Like, I would love to do a story on that. I would love to do a story on, like, as part of traveling, I go to truck stops a lot. I love me some truck stops. And the thing where you blow your hands to dry it, and it shows the hand and there's the dots, that always makes me think of Kirby dots. That always makes me think of Jack Kirby dots. And like, there's stuff in it for that. Like, I'm really interested in stuff like
that. I love that. I hope you get to. What percentage of what your output at Popverse would you say is that you're saying service journalism? And I love that phrase because I think that there's so much of the conversation we've had around this is, well, what's wrong with kids today is blah blah blah. And instead, the way you're coming to this is very generous. It's very acknowledging where people are and bringing it to them, as opposed to things should be X, Y, Z. What percentage of what you guys do now is that sort of service journalism?
I would say between all the different mediums, probably 20 to 25%. Sometimes it's basic service journalism, such as like, when is the release date for this?
Yeah.
It could be how to read this in order, how to play Grand Theft Auto in order, how to, what's big for us now is how to watch 28 Days Later in order. And you can be for certain in my 28 Days Later watch order, I include the comics, which has had some drawn by Declan Shalvey in that, because it is a continuity in that. So even in stories not about comics, I find a way to work comics in. Like, I'm writing a piece on the Righteous Gemstones because as we record this, the series finale is coming up.
Yeah.
I'll work in a reference to a guide that we wrote about the best comics, basically the Bible to the comics about the Bible. It's basically a list of the best comics about the Bible. And I try to work that in, even into the non-comic stuff. But yeah, probably about 20 to 30%. And sometimes the service journalism morphs into something else. Like, we did a great piece, Kat Kalama and I, the question, why does DC publish so many Batman comics? Like, we approach that from a service journalism perspective. We asked a former publisher, we asked several other people why they publish so many. And the other question is, well, why don't you publish more? And we learned there was internal rules in place about how we can publish this many percentile of Batman comics. I believe it was like a third of the line. But if we do more than that, it would cause some ill effects across the line. And then we looked into when they have gone over that and when they have gone other, but how it exists in a vacuum. Like, why is it? Like, journalism, all kinds, is about, like, I'm like asking, like, what something is, when something is, where something is, but also why something is. And so, like, there's a series in my mind that I've been chipping away at for years about just big questions in comics, just basically asking those obvious questions that we kind of assume we know the answers to, but really getting into the meat of it, asking the people behind it. Like, one I'm working on now, like, whenever I go to a convention, if there's somebody on the guest list that can know, I'll interview them and then just add that to a flowing Google Doc. What I'm working on now is why did Watchmen break through? Like, why did Watchmen break through in the 80s? And why did it continue to break through? And there's some fascinating stuff about that, about DC publishing, but also Warner Books, which is a book division, publishing like Watchmen, and just really getting into the bottom of things and understanding how it was nurtured over the years to, like, because we've all seen great comics be published and then just kind of disappear.
Yeah.
But then there's certain comics that persist, and how, like, when DC reprinted Watchmen every year for 30, 40 years now, that they didn't just basically hit reprint on the thing, but they made small tweaks to it along the way to help sustain that in additional marketing campaigns. Interesting stuff with
I got one of
Columbia
those right here.
House.
Right there.
Yeah, there's interesting stuff, the marketing they did with Columbia House. If people are a certain age of getting free CDs from Columbia House in the 90s, there was a Columbia House did it for graphic novels, and I might have had a couple of those, but how they used that campaign to get Watchmen to people. But yeah,
that's
it's
incredible.
Just a lot of fascinating stuff.
Is there like a pivot point is there a moment where they, like, could have decided to let it die and chose not to?
I have a very fascinating spreadsheet that I will not share, but I'm dealing with price point different variations. Like, I found at least in English, at least 30 different versions of Watchmen collection that's been printed in the past 30 years. Not just 30. A second printing, 30 different versions of Watchmen. And it's trying to sales data for that is hard to come by, but it's almost to the point of all those people are retired, so maybe they'll just remember or just give me some guesstimate. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to fill that in, like, but I use the Circana data that Milton Greek has, and I use the John Jackson Miller data. And there's some other data sources that I'm coming by through other means to kind of help figure that out. But yeah, like when did Watchmen become like a like what were the stages, you know?
Yeah.
And why did, I don't know, Craven's Last Hunt, Spider-Man Craven's Last Hunt, which I would argue is in the same realm as a Watchmen. Like, why did that not take off in the same way? The same way, for instance, this is another one I'm working on. For a time in the early 80s, New Teen Titans was as popular as the X-Men. What changed? Like, what was the pivot point? I'm pretty close to that. But it's fascinating just trying to find that out. Some stuff, it's the questions we assume the answers to. Some stuff we didn't know to ask the question, but it's kind of like, why that is. Yeah.
Astounding.
Sometimes it like opens something big, sometimes it doesn't. So,
well, I will be watching for this Watchmen piece. I expect this feels like a book to me, though. Feels like we are.
I have Google Docs among Google Docs. I will show you this. Every time I go on a convention, I take a little book and I write notes. These are my books I've filled so far this year of just stuff, ideas, putting two and two together, stuff like that. And we publish one. We see how many people read it. If they want to read more, they show us by reading it. And if they don't read it. And we just kind of go that way. And sometimes I'll go on a lark and do something that people haven't shown there's a readership for, but kind of we go where people are like reading, like, you know, like if, like for this podcast, if 1 million people downloaded this podcast and gave you 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts, which I recommend, like Adam might have me on again, but it's perfectly okay. Look if he doesn't.
Well, I can tell you, Brian Hibbs has been far and away our biggest traffic getter, and I just don't know how often I can take Brian. I love Brian, but it's you know, my own blood pressure has to like balance out before I have him on again. So yeah,
but he's another example. He's been in comics journalism for years. Like his column was before The Beat. It was on Newsarama for a while. It was on other places. He launched his own comics journalism site called Savage Critics. He basically funded a newsletter with comics journalists writing for them for a time. And in some ways, he's a comics journalist. He writes about comics on the internet.
He does.
I think everybody would agree that he's biased, but I think part of the reason we read him is because we like that bias. That bias fits our mindset, you know?
Or we like to argue with that bias, right? There's also a little bit of like, oh, come on, you know? He and I, like, yeah. I feel some of that. Yeah, no, I see that, and I will say that as a you know, as a content creator, whatever it is this is, some of it is wants to look at where the traffic is going and just do more of that. But also, I think partially, I feel some freedom in the fact that we don't have a ton of traffic, so I can just do whatever I want, and if people respond to it, great. Do you ever feel like there's an editorial, like you're missing an editorial tone by just following traffic, or is the editorial tone come in those experiments? You know,
I think it's doing the experiments and then looking at the big picture and basically finding a through line through that, but not letting your editorial voice be so concrete that it isn't open to, hey, someone has a wild idea and we should try it, but not be like, well, the editorial voice is this way, so we shouldn't do it like that. It's just being elastic, but yes, having an editorial voice. Excuse me, but also understanding at some point that the editorial voice is the voice of the writers and kind of within reason, basically following what the writers are interested in, while at the same time paying attention to what the readers say they want and what the readers are telling us they want.
I can see that.
But it's the same metric for it's no different than comics. Like if if Kieran Gillen's The Power Fantasy sold 500,000 copies, if issue 6 sold 500,000 copies, he would focus in and do more of stuff like that. If issue 6 of The Power Fantasy sold 1,000 copies, which I hope it does not, I hope it sells much more than that. The readers are telling him something else, and he would make decisions based on that. And you and
But
I
if
have
you're only
all
following that logic, let's talk about, like, say, Walking Dead, right? Comes out, not a huge hit. First several issues, not a huge hit. At some point, it starts to rise, right? We start to see that rise in those single issues, and that's arguably the turning point for this series that ends up becoming one of the most successful brands that have ever come out of comics, if not the most. Who knows? I have no idea what those numbers look like, but wouldn't that sort of hit? You kind of have to commit in order to get that kind of hit. You have to say, yep, I'm going to go for a while, even if nobody responds at first. Right? That's
I completely agree. Like, he pitched that, and he said by the second arc the aliens would show up, and right, they never did. But he needed that to get thing, and him and Tony were doing that unpaid, waiting at least 90 days for the money to come in. I remember buying the single issues, and by around 6, it became popular, like within the realm of, hey, it's a hot new Image book. And we've known several other hot new Image books that hit that, but then don't follow through. Like, there's a great book named Non-Player that I feel got to that, The Walking Dead first sign of success thing, and just financially, physically weren't able to handle that. But yeah, that's why we're trying things to get towards a profitable business. Like, you and I know many great comics journalism websites and podcasts that will try for years to find a way to make it something they can do for a living. And if it's not, maybe they discontinue it. Maybe they continue it, but only do it part-time. Like, for instance, Tom Spurgeon's comics reporter, like, he wasn't able to make that his full-time job. Still did it, but did it at a slower rate than what everybody would want, because he had to work for a living, which is something that all of us are okay with. Like, even in comics, like, there's a lot of people that do comics as their part-time job, and they have several other jobs. Like, and
it's true. It's very,
there's no shame in that, but it's just kind of realizing what that is. Yes,
I'd like
you're right about taking the risk.
Let's transition a little bit here and talk about something. Again, I was looking back at my notes, and at the time that you and I spoke, that one, I don't remember when this exactly was. I need to look at it when. It was about me marketing for a particular employer that I was working for. And we were discussing what does using comics journalism now look like, as opposed to what it did, say, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And you had some really great tips for it. I would love to talk about that as of today. So we're in May of 2025. If you're working with a marketer or a PR person, whomever at a publisher, what are the opportunities for working with Popverse and with other journalists now that maybe people are not seeing, or have just shifted in a way?
Shifted talks about things in the past, so I try to talk about the present. And if you want, we can go into that, because those are rabbit holes that I can go down too quickly. But when PR people want to reach out to comics journalists, be it people that get paid to do comics journalism, be it people that do it for free, people influencers, which are comics journalism, that do it on Twitter or other social media. Like, for manga, there's this great Twitter feed called Manga Mokira that does amazing work, or like a YouTube channel. What you're trying to get them to do is to, I don't mean this derogatory, but If a PR person is reaching out, they want them to write about their product in a way that is free advertising, in a way that is also can be comics journalism and can be interesting. But there is a implicit part of that where we're approaching you because we want you to write it about it favorably. And like, if I don't know it, so for stuff like that, I would be find the outlets that exist. That this is like, if you were a marketing person, a marketing person for that, find the outlets that exist, understand what their metrics are, and find out what that is. Like, I had what I call a real talk with a marketing person, where they approached me to this book to cover this book, and I was like, I like this book personally. I would love to write about it, but I am at a loss, as is other people in this business, to write about it in a way that will be read by a large number of people. I would estimate this is a real talk. Like, this would be read by 600 people, give or take. Is that, like, I might be okay with it in this circumstance to do that. I have written loads of articles that I love that were read by 600 people.
Right.
But is the marketing person, is that something that would be, that they feel is good for them? Are they fine with 600 views? Or could we work on a better angle to cover that? And if certain people can take that the wrong way, certain people can turn that, instead of that being the end to a conversation, can be the start of a conversation where they can work out other stuff. Maybe we give you access to this. Maybe we do it at this time frame. Maybe we partner it with something else, or maybe there's other ways to do it. Because I know marketers in comics don't, basically, I don't believe any marketer in comics doesn't want people to write about them for free as a volunteer basis. I don't think they want to do that, but I think it's just trying to find a way to reach readers in a way. I feel like I'm getting vastly off topic here, but just to I would say, just to understand what your book is and what your book isn't, finding the places that cover those things, or places that have ways to figure that out, and go towards that. Like, I would read a monthly interview with my favorite artist, who I'm not going to say. I would love doing that, but after about 3 or 4 months, if no one's reading it, and I don't think I would talk to this artist and be like, hey, we need to find maybe either some other way to do it. Maybe we tinker with it, or maybe we discontinue it, or maybe we do it in another format. But it's just, I don't know. It's kind of difficult.
There is, so I think you're right in that. So what you're saying is what I'm hearing is that there is no good way to systematize this in the way it used to be, of, we're going to give you an exclusive on this announcement, and then there's going to be a full press release. Those kinds of things were very systematic, right?
Yeah, there existed a system that probably lasted from around 2002 to about 2018, where a exclusive on and for the people who don't know what that is, an exclusive is a publisher or a creator will approach a journalism website and offer them news on an unannounced book, and being the place to write it out in exchange for writing about it. And a lot of sites, even magazines, newspapers, will do this on the basis of it being an exclusive. Bleeding Cool to the Hollywood Reporter will write about it based on it being exclusive, and not to be biased towards, we're only going to write about it in a good way, but they'll write it, if it's something that they can write about in a good way, they can be realistic and partner with that for that. And there's other opportunities for that. But as we've learned, readers are less interested in reading articles about a new book than for, say, liking a tweet or a post on social media about a new book with a cover in it. So to then it becomes an effort to make a story interesting enough that people would want to read beyond just the whatever can fit on a Twitter post and an image, and finding the interesting bits that is more than that can't be summed up in just 2 or 3 sentences, and finding that. And
Right.
sometimes you're not able to find that, or I personally am not able to find that. And for some pieces, we are. Like, I have one of those pieces now. A PR person who you and I know reached out to me with an exclusive preview of this thing. Couldn't find a way to do it in the time frame that was suggested, but there was something to it. So it became it's going to turn into a story that's going to be published in about a month's time. That is going to be a much deeper story, where I had a thought. I was able to think about it and come up with something that's more interesting, that I think has a chance that more people would read about it. And sometimes that takes a while to come up with. That's because I'm biased in a certain way towards I wanted to say yes to it, but like a lot of other stuff, I may not be biased, as I don't have enough insider information or a deeper understanding of it to write something in a way that a lot of people would read. And so it's about changing that dynamic. And even the term exclusive, like trying to bend that internally. Sometimes we make our own exclusives by somebody says something in a panel on a interview that they do not think is news, that is not treated as a exclusive that can be marketed, but it may be the first time some of that has come up. Like, for instance, DC Fandom, a online convention that went on for years during the pandemic. After the pandemic subsided to a degree, people just kind of accepted it's probably not coming back. But Graham McMillan and I realized that there was never actually an announcement, exclusive or otherwise, that it was made. So he and I, mostly him, with me just encouraging him, basically got the exclusive that it was definitely not happening, and we ran that. And for some people, it was like, oh, this is old news. We already knew that. But it turns out people didn't actually know it in a broader way. Yeah. So in some ways, you kind of make the exclusive. That happened at Emerald City. I don't know if you were at. Terry Brooks announced he was retiring from writing the Swords of... I've read the books, but I don't know how to pronounce Shannara. And he just announced that in a panel. Adam, as you, if you were his publisher, as a marketing person, you probably would have framed that as an exclusive and probably partnered with a humongous outlet like LA Times or something to do that. And but for him, he wanted to say it at a panel, and we rushed that story out. That was Graham again in about 2 to 3 hours. And so it's changed, where readers are more discriminate about what they want to read, and therefore journalists have to become better at finding the deeper story rather than just the social media story. Like, before the pandemic, there was this interesting pitch, which a company had this idea to create a comics and comics related journalism site that would only exist on Twitter. Okay. And they would run them, and they would basically, everything would be short form text, maybe threaded stuff, and then an image. And it was fascinating. But even this company, they were a startup company, it's figuring out a way to, dirty word here, monetize it, to basically pay the people to do the work. And that was always the hard part, to do that. And I say that, then there's people that do it online now, like Manga Mokura, whoever runs the discussing film thread, stuff like that. But are they making a living, or is this just something they're doing volunteerism because they really believe in it? If so, like, great. Like, there's stuff that I volunteer for, like Saturday, May 6th, and then May 3rd, I'm going to be volunteering for something all day after I go to Free Comic Day. But
I was going to say, are you working that shop for Free Comic Day?
No.
Well, excellent. I know that we're both going to run out of time, and I wanted to spend a little. Thank you for that. I think that your viewpoint on this has always been good, and I think that there's a definite kind of symbiosis between the two, like between marketing and selling and journalism. They really can and should work together. And I've been on here with a couple different people saying I really do believe that in many ways we have some responsibility as publishers and as people with marketing budgets to fill in the gaps for you for your revenue. Right? If we're asking you to do something that is maybe not going to get the traffic, you have to make that money somewhere, and that somewhere could be advertising, and we should be buying that advertising. I 100% believe.
Traffic it's the same way of comics selling copies of books, number of tickets sold.
Yep.
So when people demonize it as clicks or something like that, it's like me basically saying, "Oh, you're just putting that on the cover of your thing to sell books." Like, it's, I don't know. It doesn't need to be pejorative. Like you're just having Chris Arrant on this podcast to get clicks, Adam. Like,
yeah. You and I both, man. We're gonna get this is gonna light the internet on fire. Yeah, the two of us talking on YouTube. So, but before I lose you today, I wanted to talk a little bit about where we are with comics distribution. You and I have had a lot of conversations about this, both privately and even on our live show, Comic Industry Insiders Live, which if you haven't liked, subscribed, and hit the alert button, you probably didn't hear about it. So maybe you should do those things. But and we also did a panel at C2E2 on the past, present, and future of comics distribution. I know that you have stayed up to date on this. Talking to you is always incredibly informative, and I always either learn something new despite being, working really hard to stay current, or I get a new take on it. So I'd love to hear, we don't need to dig deep into the history of how we got to where we are, but where we're standing right now, May 2nd, 2025, what is the state of comics distribution, and what do you expect to happen through the end of this year?
As of today, majority of Diamond, which is not the main anymore, but one of the main places to distribute comics to comic stores and to a lesser extent to bookstores, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And through some interesting stories, they have two buyers that are going to split the company in half. One for mainly the comics distribution and one for mainly the games distribution. I'd say the names, but it could be two different companies next week, as we've learned in the past.
We sure have.
But a couple days ago, they got approval to be the buyers, but now they have this period where these approved bidders get to have a deeper look at the paperwork of Diamond to see what they're actually buying, unredacted versions of stuff, and to be able to have conversations with some of Diamond's vendors who they would be taking over to see if it's in fact something they want to buy. It's the equivalent of if you wanted to buy a car, but you wanted to do the Carfax. They are in the midst of doing that now. A previous buyer basically asked for the Carfax report for Diamond and was surprised by some stuff. And Diamond was, according to court records, allegedly, Diamond was unwilling to negotiate a lower price, even though one of their critical vendors, as someone is quoted saying, was basically not going to be part of the package. So what happens now? These buyers are going to be looking at the company over the next few weeks. They will decide if at that point they want to go through with the sale, or if they want to adjust the numbers, or they want to bring in a third party, or whatever they want to do. And then they ultimately decide for real if they're going to buy the company. This is at the same time that other comic distribution goes on with Lunar Distribution, with PRH, with other smaller outfits. This is not to mention digital distribution, and not to mention like book trade distribution. But for the specific Diamond side of things, it's going to be really confusing. It's going to be more confusing for retailers than for us. Be confusing for publishers. There's a lot of publishers whose money is tied up right now. Diamond says they're spending at least $4 million a month that they don't have, and they're worried about the bank foreclosing on them, so they're trying to speed things up. it will not get unconfusing. Retailers a year from now, to be a comic store, will have to order from multiple catalogs with multiple different return policies that will be different and different percentages, and they will have to make hard choices about that. It will become complicated for them. It will not be simplified. PRH or Lunar will not buy this company. It's just not the right thing. So it's going to get more confusing. I think it may be, especially over the next 6 months, because even if these people decide to buy the company, then becomes the process of taking on this company and splitting it in two, even though Diamond and its facilities, its HR department, its leases on its building, everything else is one company. So who gets the warehouse? It's two companies. So do they split it, or do they have to? It's going to be very complicated. I see this could be 6 months is a very glass half full way of looking at it. This could be 2 or 3 years before they actually split the company and begin running it. Then it could take 3 to 4 years before they can run it well. And I foresee for the people still at Diamond who we know and we like, or we understand their policies, they may decide to leave, because for them this will be a very difficult period as for what this is. So for going back to service journalism, what does it mean for comics readers? Your release dates for things are going to change due to the distribution. It'll change for other reasons. There could be price increases, not just due for the other reasons we're reading in the mainstream newspapers, but it's going to be more expensive for a publisher to put a book through a distribution system. It's going to be confusing. There's going to be, well, I thought they announced this. Like Adam and I have been through that. It's going to be complicated before it becomes less complicated. And there was a time when Diamond was a monopoly, and that there was a certain bad part of that, but in one part of that, it was one unified system doing a lot of things, and it made things easier. I do not see a unified system coming out of this for good reasons, but also for bad reasons, how everything's going to be just more disorganized. Multiple catalogs, multiple ordering systems, just a lot more complicated. And that's where finding a good comic store that'll give it to you straight is like really, really key now. Just to and for comic stores to be able to say, like, this is going to happen or this won't happen, or to give you the best thing of all. When if they don't know something, they'll tell you they don't know. Like, that's the hardest but most truest thing, if people can tell you that they don't know.
100%.
I think that's going to be difficult. And that goes the same things for comics journalism. We could write an article, like Adam could say, hey, write an article on the future of comics journalism. It would be a lot of, I don't know, right now. And sometimes that's what comics journalism needs. Just there's a lot of questions right now.
Have you guys done any pieces on this distribution shakeup? How did they perform?
Graham has written 3 pieces. I have 2 pieces that I want to write, probably on the plane to PAX East, about this. And they have people aren't beating down the door to read these articles. They need to be done, so we will continue to do them, but we may not do as many as we would like to, because readers aren't telling us that they really, really want to read it. Like, we've figured out a way to write about it in a certain stint to cover the major things. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot more. Like, there's where does Free Comic Book Day go in all this? There's confusions in legal reports on if Diamond UK is involved in the sale or is not involved in the sale. Diamond itself says Diamond UK is not involved in the sale. Court records show it is in the sale. Diamond may change their website to later change that. We don't know. There's a lot of stories that we could write if people show they want to read it.
Fascinating. Yeah, I personally am holding out hope that this due diligence period will go faster for these new buyers, because they were, these were, at least half of them, the Universal side, they're buyers who were in it before the bankruptcy. Like, they were legitimate. They were looking at paperwork before this whole thing started, right? They were doing that due diligence already. So I have hope that this period won't last as long, but who knows? You're
I
right.
say that, but the other company was in that due diligence and signed on for it, and then from their perspective, got more data that was concerning for them. In our reporting, we looked up some stuff. Diamond was looking at selling their games business in the early 2000s to one of these same three companies. Like, what happened there? There's something fascinating there. One of the companies buying it now, Ad Populum. I have this pulled up because I'm not a fluent Greek speaker. Ad populum is a logical fallacy that argues something is true or good simply because many people believe it. That could be the thread for something like this. Like, so just
That's true.
yeah.
Yeah, you have been in that, especially even on our live show when we were discussing this. You were an advocate for, taking commentary with a grain of salt and really looking into what the facts of the situation are. It's a good reminder for all of us. We're coming in, I think, on the end of our time. Is there anything we wanted to talk about that we didn't? Because I do want to make sure that we're plugging all the good work that you're doing, and if there's any beefs you want to air, now would be the time.
Beefs. Here we go. No. For the comics journalism thing, I would say there's two major periods. That's when comics journalism went from primarily being magazines, which readers bought themselves and people could tell directly, to being an online thing that was done through where the revenue is ad-based, and it's done through that. That was a big change in the early 2000s. I'd also say in 2010 or so, which you referred to, is when comic publishers, for the most part, stopped advertising on comics journalism websites and instead went to a method of asking them to write about them from a marketing perspective for free. Like, that changed things in a major way. There's also been some publishers that have bought into comics journalism magazines, comics journalism websites. Like, the owners of Dynamite own a website. Boom was interested in buying a website. Avatar Press, which was a former comics publisher, owns Bleeding Cool.
I don't know if they're still putting stuff out or not. Yeah.
They have really good catalog, but they do stuff but those are the big changes. Like, when readers stopped paying for comics journalism directly to go online, and when comic publishers stopped supporting comics websites in a financial way that they would before, and even go back then to the bias. Like, there was rules in place then to prevent, like, a CBR or a Newsarama from writing a pro Marvel piece when they were running an ad for Civil War or whatever. But it just made things complicated. But, like, it's like those are, I think, are the two periods. Like, we're probably in a third period now that we're still kind of figuring out what it is. So yeah, I love reading comics. I love writing about comics. I love paying my mortgage. How do I do all three?
Well, apparently part of the answer is to live in Panama City in Florida. That's
Yes, but if people want to support me and what we're doing, myself and my team are at thepopverse.com. You can find us on all the major and minor social media outlets under Popverse Says. We do a lot of stuff for free. We also have a paid tier where we let some of our writers loose on writing some even more amazing stories that we know will have a small audience, but we have a group of people that support us monetarily, so we're encouraged to do that in a way that is rewarding for both of us. I write about Marvel, the big picture, not just comics, once a week. I have a piece on their digital comics changes coming up. I'm going to launch a column about comics for free each week called Issues. that is talking about the issues of comics, both in a bad and good way. I'm really excited about that. I have 4 pieces complete. I would love to run those right this very moment as soon as we get off this podcast, but I need to stutter it out so I can have it for you weekly. There's other things we're doing towards that point. But yeah, thepopverse.com is where you can find us. And if you want to support us, buy a monthly membership. It's the price of a coffee, probably like even less nowadays. And you can even tell us what you want to see, and we will be biased. If you are a paid member, we will listen to you more than we listen to other people.
That's right. You want to counter bias? Make it your bias. Make it biased towards what you want to see by supporting.
Yes.
I like that. Yeah. It's a good point. I think it bears repeating. We've talked to, during this series, we've talked to David Harper, we've talked to Heidi McDonald, now talked to Chris. All 3 of these platforms are supported, at least in part, by the readers, by the Patreons, by the people who are subscribing. I will tell you, I've already told Chris, it's so challenging to get through the Popverse subscription model, but once you do,
Yes.
It's totally worth it. 100% worth it. But yeah, that's if we want good journalism, if we want good reporting, we have to support it. And by we, I mean us as readers. We need to be subscribing, and us as publishers, we need to be sponsoring. We need to be buying these ads. We need to be supporting Chris's new series issues. Like, we need to make this happen. The only way this happens is through money, and the money comes from us. So we can't just keep pointing fingers at these guys and hope that somehow that's going to shift things. So, all right, that's my rant. I thank you, Chris, for coming on. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure we're going to be talking. I don't know. It seems like we talk on a monthly basis in public, some form or fashion now. So
yeah, we should find ourselves at a panel at New York Comic Con somehow, or you send someone in your stead if you want to, like if you want to sponsor somebody to have a panel.
I'm thinking about it. New York Comic Con is going to be tricky for me this year. I haven't quite figured out how to make that happen, but we'll be there. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to it. All right, buddy. Thank you so much for making the time today and for bringing your experience and expertise. This has been wonderful. Really appreciate it. This message is brought to you by the Prana Bullet. What is the Prana Bullet? I'm glad you asked. It's a weekly newsletter dropped in your inbox every Friday. It's designed to keep you up to speed on that week in the comics industry, and our goal is to keep it light, to keep it informative, and I swear to you, we're going to keep it easy to skim. Each week, we're always looking for new things to learn about our comics industry and the changing landscape that it is, and this is the one place where you can catch up on everything you might have missed. Plus, the monthly Prana bestseller list is going to drop here first. If that sounds like the news you need, head over to pranadm.com and sign up today. That's PRANADM.com and sign up. And if you do, I'll see you this Friday.